8 days. That's how long Margaret Brenner wore the chains. 8 days of metal cutting into her wrists. 8 days waiting for the horror she'd been promised. 8 days that would change everything she believed about the world, about her enemies, about herself. But this isn't a story about chains. This is a story about what happened when an American officer saw those chains and said 4 words that shattered a 24-year-old German woman's entire understanding of reality. Before we begin, if you appreciate stories where truth defeats propaganda, where kindness breaks through hatred, hit that subscribe button right now. These stories matter. They're disappearing from memory, one generation at a time. Don't let them be forgotten. April 1945, Western Germany, somewhere near Cologne. Margaret Brenner. Maggie, to the few people who still knew her before the war, sat in the back of an American transport truck. The metal chains around her wrists clinked softly every time the vehicle hit another crater in the bombed-out road. She was 24 years old. Before the war, she'd taught elementary school in Hamburg. She taught children to read and write. She taught them that Germany was the greatest nation on earth, that Germans were destined to lead, that their enemies were subhuman creatures bent on destroying everything good and pure. She believed every single word. 18 months ago, she'd joined the Women's Signal Corps. They needed educated women who could work communications equipment, send coded messages between army units, maintain the flow of information that kept the Wehrmacht functioning. It felt important. It felt like serving something larger than herself. 3 days ago, American soldiers overran her position. The officers fled first, they always did at the end. The men scattered. Maggie and the other women in her unit were left in a concrete bunker with no orders, no escape route, no idea what to do, except wait. The Americans found them hiding in the dark. Young men with rifles and helmets speaking harsh English words she didn't understand. They searched the women for weapons, found none, and loaded them onto trucks without explanation. That's when the chains came out. Now Maggie sat between 2 other women, unable to see where they were going. The truck had a canvas cover. Everything outside was hidden. She could only feel the motion, hear the engine smell, diesel fuel, and unwashed bodies, and fear. The chains made her wrists bleed. Not much, just enough to leave red marks on the metal red stains on her sleeves. 6 hours now, maybe 7. She'd lost count. The woman on her left was named Liesl Rothman. She was 19 years old, though she looked younger. Thin face, hollow eyes. Her hands shook constantly, even when she tried to hold them still. Liesl came from a poor farm in Bavaria. Her family barely had enough food to eat even before the war. Her father grew potatoes and turnips in rocky soil. Her mother made soup from vegetable scraps and sometimes tree bark when there was nothing else. They survived, but just barely. 8 months ago, Liesl joined the Anti-Aircraft Corps. Not because she cared about politics or believed in the war. She joined because the army fed her 3 meals a day. Real meals. Bread that wasn't moldy. Soup with actual vegetables. Sometimes even meat. She didn't care much about defending Germany. She just didn't want to be hungry anymore. 2 weeks ago, a piece of shrapnel from an American bomb had sliced through her left shoulder. It wasn't deep, but it wasn't healing properly either. The wound oozed yellowish fluid. It hurt when she moved. She worried constantly that it might get infected, that she might die from something so small. 2 days ago, when the American tanks rolled past her gun position, the officers abandoned their posts. They left Liesl and 3 other girls hiding in a barn, waiting for orders that never came. American troops found them the next morning. The Americans put chains on her wrists and loaded her into a truck. The woman on Maggie's right was older. Her name was Anna Lindemann. She was 32. Before the war, she'd worked as a legal secretary in Berlin. Smart woman. Organized. She could type 90 words per minute and take dictation in shorthand. She read French and spoke passable English. Anna's husband died fighting the Russians in 1943. She had 2 children, a daughter named Maria, 9 years old, and a son named Klaus, 6. She'd sent them to live with relatives in Austria last year to keep them safe from the bombing. She'd been trying to reach them when the Americans captured her on a road outside Cologne. She hadn't slept in 3 days. hadn't eaten in 36 hours. She'd hidden her wedding ring inside her left boot, gold band still warm against her foot. Sometimes she touched the boot just to feel the metal through the leather, to remember that her husband had existed, that their life together hadn't been a dream. All three women had been told the same things by their officers, by the propaganda films, by the radio broadcasts. The enemy would hurt them. The Americans would be cruel. The British would be worse. The Russians, God help anyone captured by Russians. Women who fell into enemy hands would suffer unspeakable things. The propaganda films showed Allied soldiers as monsters. The radio said they raped and murdered without mercy. When the Americans first caught them, Maggie expected the worst, but the soldiers just searched them, checked for weapons, looked through their bags, then put them in trucks with other prisoners and drove away. They separated the women from the male prisoners immediately. This terrified Maggie more than anything. The separation felt like a prelude, like the bad things would start now, away from witnesses. Instead, the soldiers just put chains on their wrists. Standard procedure, maybe. Security measure. Something they did to all prisoners during transport. The women didn't know that. They thought the chains were just the beginning. They thought worse was coming. 47 German women had been captured together near Oldenburg. The American Third Army was moving fast through Western Germany now. The German military was collapsing. Some units surrendered, some fled. Some just dissolved soldiers walking away from the war and trying to get home before everything ended. The women didn't know where they were being taken. They didn't know what would happen next. Maggie whispered Nazi slogans to herself, things she'd memorized years ago, things she'd taught to children. Strength through unity, unity through faith. We do not yield. We do not surrender. She tried to stay strong, tried to remember her training. Be brave, show no weakness. Don't trust the enemy. Don't speak unless spoken to. Give only name and rank. Resist interrogation. She kept her mother's locket pressed against her chest under her uniform. Silver chain, small oval locket with her mother's photograph inside, taken before the war. It was all she had left of home, all she had left of the world she used to know. Liesl said nothing. She just stared at the truck floor and tried to ignore the pain in her shoulder. The shrapnel wound throbbed with her heartbeat. Every bump in the road sent fresh pain through her arm. She wondered if she would ever see her parents again. Wondered if their farm was still standing. Wondered if she would die here far from home and her mother would never know what happened to her. Anna watched everything. She'd always been observant. A good legal secretary notices details, remembers things, connects patterns. She noticed how the American guards acted. They shouted commands, yes, but they didn't hit anyone. Didn't touch the women except during the initial search. They seemed tired more than cruel, professional more than savage. She noticed the trucks were in good condition, clean, well maintained. The engines ran smoothly. She noticed the guards had plenty of supplies. Their uniforms looked new. Their boots weren't falling apart. They had cigarettes, coffee, chocolate bars. They shared food with each other casually, like it was nothing special. This confused Anna. The propaganda had told them the Allies were running out of everything. The Americans were supposed to be desperate, starving, barely holding together. Their economy was collapsing. Their people were suffering worse than Germans. But these soldiers looked well-fed, well-equipped. They moved with the casual confidence of men who had everything they needed and more. After 2 hours, the truck stopped. The women heard boots crunching on gravel outside, English voices calling out orders. The tailgate opened with a metallic clang. Bright sunlight flooded in after the darkness of the covered truck. The women squinted against the sudden light. They could see silhouettes of soldiers standing there, dark shapes against the brightness. Maggie took a deep breath. This was it. Whatever came next would happen now. She thought of her mother back in Hamburg. The last letter had come 3 months ago. The city was being bombed almost daily. Food was scarce. Fuel was gone. People were burning furniture to stay warm. Her mother was alive then. Maggie hoped she was still alive now. Liesel started trembling. She couldn't stop. Her whole body shook. She bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, trying to keep from crying out. Anna thought of her children in Austria, Maria and Klaus. She prayed they were safe, prayed she would see them again someday, prayed they would remember her face. The soldiers gestured for the women to climb out. The chains made it hard to move. Maggie nearly fell getting down from the truck bed, caught herself at the last moment. They stood in a line, blinking in the sunlight, waiting. This was supposed to be the end of their story according to everything they'd been taught. Enemy soldiers, captured women, chains. This was where terrible things happened. But this was only the beginning. Their real story was about to start, and nothing they believed had prepared them for what came next. The first holding facility was a large tent with wooden floors. British military police stood alongside American soldiers. The women were taken inside one at a time. A soldier with a clipboard asked questions in broken German. Name, rank, age. Which unit did you serve in? Where were you captured? Maggie answered in a flat voice. Margaret Brenner, Auxiliary, 24, Women's Signal Corps 5th Communications Battalion, captured near Cologne. The soldier wrote it down. Then something strange happened. A guard offered her a cup of water and a piece of bread. Maggie stared at the food. She didn't take it at first. Her mind raced through possibilities. Poisoned, drugged, a trick to make her weak, to make her talk, to break her resistance. The guard set the cup and bread on the table in front of her. Then he walked away. He didn't force her, didn't threaten, didn't even look back. Just left the food there and moved on to process the next prisoner. Maggie stared at the bread for a long time. Liesel was processed next. When the guard offered her water, she grabbed it immediately. She was too thirsty to care about poison or tricks. She drank the whole cup in 3 long swallows, water running down her chin. Then she waited for the agony to start, for her throat to close, for her stomach to cramp, for whatever poison they'd given her to take effect. Nothing happened. The water was clean, cold, pure. It tasted like water, just water. The bread was hard and stale, but it was real. She ate it in 3 bites, chewing carefully, swallowing despite the fear. It tasted like rye bread, maybe 2 days old, normal bread that normal people ate. Anna watched the guards carefully while she was processed. She studied their faces, their movements, their interactions with each other. They acted professional, bored even. They didn't stare at the women with cruel intent, didn't make threatening gestures, didn't smile at their fear. They just did their jobs, processing prisoners, recording information, moving the line along. This was not what Anna expected. This was not what the propaganda had prepared her for. 2 days later, the women were moved to a port. Maybe Bremen, maybe Cuxhaven. Maggie wasn't sure. About 200 German prisoners were loaded onto a ship, mostly men, some women. The ship had been a hospital vessel before, white paint with red crosses. Now it carried prisoners across the English Channel to England. The women were given their own sleeping area, separate from the men. Small compartment below deck, cramped but private. There were clean blankets stacked in a corner. Actual wool blankets. They smelled like soap. Liesel touched one of the blankets and brought it to her nose. Real soap. Chemical soap, not the ersatz stuff they'd been using in Germany for the past year. When was the last time she'd slept under something that smelled this clean? She couldn't remember. The ship rocked on the waves. The English Channel was rough that day. Many prisoners got seasick. Maggie felt her stomach turn. She was already scared and exhausted. Now she felt sick too. But a ship's medical officer came to check on them. He was an American captain. His name tag said Morrison, though Maggie couldn't read English well enough to be sure. He had kind eyes, grey hair, maybe 50 years old. He examined Liesel's shoulder wound. She pulled back, terrified, but his hands were gentle. He cleaned the cut with iodine. It stung, but not cruelly. Then he wrapped fresh bandages around her shoulder, white gauze, clean, properly tied. He spoke a little German, not much, just a few words. "You'll be fine, miss. We check again in 1 week." His voice was calm, almost grandfatherly. Liesl didn't know what to think. Why was he being nice? Why wasn't he hurting her? What was the trick? The food on the ship came at regular times, morning, midday, evening. Each meal was simple but adequate. Watery soup, bread that wasn't moldy, sometimes a piece of dried fruit, sometimes a biscuit. It wasn't much, but it was more food than Maggie had eaten in weeks. Back in Germany, the rations had become almost nothing. The army barely fed them anymore. Sometimes they went days with almost nothing but ersatz coffee and stale bread. One morning, Liesl whispered to Maggie in the darkness of their compartment.
"Why are they feeding us at all?"
Maggie had an answer ready. She'd been thinking about this. It's a trick. They want us to trust them. They're fattening us up like livestock. Once we get to their country, everything will change. They'll show their true nature then. But even as she said it, Maggie felt a small seed of doubt growing inside her. A tiny question she couldn't quite silence. What if it wasn't a trick? Anna noticed other things. She always noticed things. The ship's crew had plenty to eat. She saw them in the galley when guards escorted prisoners past. Real meals, meat, vegetables, bread with butter. The systems on the ship were organized, efficient. Everything had a schedule, a procedure, a place. Nobody looked desperate. Nobody looked starving. The propaganda had said Britain was on its knees. The radio broadcasts claimed British people were suffering just as badly as Germans, worse even. Food riots in London, starvation in the countryside, a nation on the verge of collapse. But the evidence in front of Anna's eyes told a completely different story. On the fourth day, they reached Southampton on the southern coast of England. The women could see the dock from the ship's deck. British people walked around doing normal things. Dock workers loading cargo, women pushing prams with babies, children playing near the water's edge. Yes, there were bombed buildings. Sections of the city showed damage from German air raids. But there was also construction. New buildings going up, cranes and scaffolding, people working to rebuild. The city looked busy, active, alive, not broken, not destroyed, not on the verge of collapse. The women were loaded onto trains, not cattle cars like they'd feared, passenger cars, with seats. The windows weren't boarded up. They could look outside as the train moved through southern England. Liesl pressed her face against the glass for hours. She couldn't stop staring. Green fields stretched in every direction, intact villages with stone churches and thatched roofs, cows grazing in pastures, horses pulling ploughs, farmers working their land. Small children stood at a train crossing waving as the prisoner transport passed. They looked healthy, well-fed. Their cheeks had colour. "Where are the ruins?" Liesl whispered. "Where is the starvation?" Maggie saw it too. Every mile of track contradicted what they'd been told. Britain was supposed to be destroyed. The people were supposed to be starving, suffering, dying. Germany's bombing campaign was supposed to have broken them completely. But the countryside looked peaceful, almost untouched, like the war was happening somewhere else entirely. 7 days after their capture, they boarded another ship in Liverpool. This one was much bigger. A troop transport vessel heading across the Atlantic Ocean to America. Almost 900 German prisoners were loaded on board. 76 of them were women. The women were assigned bunks in a separate section, their own deck, their own washroom, privacy curtains between bunks. The chains stayed on during boarding. Maggie's wrists had gone numb by now. 8 days wearing these metal restraints. The skin underneath was raw and bloody, but she'd stopped feeling the pain. Just numbness. A guard told Anna in halting German that the chains would come off once they were at sea. His name tag said Becker. He was young, maybe 25. German surname, probably German-American. "Sorry about the chains, ma'am," he said, searching for the right German words. "Regulations. They come off when we leave port." Anna stared at him. Why was he apologizing? Why would an enemy soldier apologize for following security procedures? It didn't make sense. The Atlantic crossing took 11 days. The North Atlantic in April was rough, cold. The ship pitched and rolled on heavy seas. The women's section was crowded. 76 women in a space designed for maybe 60, but it wasn't cruel. It was just cramped. Each day they received food, not much but regular. Porridge for breakfast. Watery, yes, but hot. With a little sugar if you wanted it. Bread and soup for lunch. The bread was hard but edible. The soup had vegetables in it, carrots, potatoes, sometimes beans. Tea in the afternoon. Real tea, not ersatz, with sugar. Another meal in the evening, usually something similar to lunch. Anna kept count in her head. She'd always been good with numbers. She estimated each woman received about 2,200 calories per day. 2,200 calories. That was more than Anna had eaten in 6 months back in Germany. More than most civilians received. More than many soldiers received at the end. Liesel's wound was checked twice during the crossing by the ship's medical staff. Once on the 3rd day, once on the 7th. Each time an American medic, different men but both equally professional, cleaned the injury, applied fresh antiseptic, wrapped new bandages. Each time Liesel expected something bad to happen. Expected rough hands. Expected pain inflicted deliberately. Expected cruelty. Each time nothing bad happened. The medics were gentle, efficient. They did their job and moved on. Maggie watched the American soldiers during their downtime. When the guards thought no one was paying attention, they joked with each other, played cards, shared cigarettes, showed each other photographs from home wives, girlfriends, children, parents. They laughed. Actual laughter. Not the hard, cruel laughter of men who enjoyed suffering. Just normal laughter. The kind people make when someone tells a funny story or makes a stupid joke. They weren't the fanatics Maggie had imagined. They weren't monsters or demons or subhuman creatures. They were just regular men doing a job, tired, homesick, wanting the war to be over so they could go home. This realization disturbed Maggie more than cruelty would have. On the last night before reaching America, Anna couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bunk, listening to the ship's engines thrumming through the hull, listening to women breathing and snoring around her. She thought about what she'd seen. The evidence accumulating day by day. The ship's crew was well fed, healthy. Their uniforms were clean and properly maintained. The ship itself ran smoothly. Everything worked. The systems functioned with casual efficiency. The sailors weren't desperate or struggling. They acted like men who had more than enough of everything they needed. The propaganda said America was Britain's weak partner, barely able to feed itself, dependent on others for survival. But the evidence said otherwise. The ships worked, the food came regularly, the systems functioned. And if they'd lied about this, about how weak the enemy was, what else was a lie? What else had she believed that wasn't true? The ship pulled into New York Harbor on April 30th, 1945. Adolf Hitler was dead, though the women didn't know it yet. He'd killed himself in his bunker in Berlin the day before. Germany would surrender unconditionally in 1 week. The old world was ending. Their new world was about to begin. New York Harbor smelled like salt water and diesel fuel and industry. Morning haze hung over the water, grey and thick. The temperature was about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Cool spring morning. The women stood on deck with almost 900 other prisoners. They still wore their chains. 8 days now. Maggie's wrists had stopped hurting entirely. The flesh was numb, damaged, but she couldn't feel it anymore. They lined up outside a processing building at the military port. Maggie expected angry crowds. Expected American civilians to throw things at them, to yell, to spit. Instead, they saw only organized military operations. A few dock workers walked past, barely glancing at the prisoners. The port facilities looked well maintained. No bomb damage. America had never been touched by war. Supplies were stacked in neat rows along the dock. Everything was orderly, calm, professional. Anna saw a guard eating an apple, just eating an apple like it was nothing special. Fresh fruit, in April, abundant enough to eat casually. In Germany, an apple would have been a treasure, something you saved, something you shared carefully among family members. Here a soldier ate one while walking, tossed the core in a trash bin, and kept going. The casual abundance was more shocking than any cruelty could have been. An American officer walked toward the line of women. He was tall, looked tired. His uniform said Major Dalton Garrett on the name tag. Anna could read a little English. He was probably in his late 40s, grey at his temples, lines around his eyes. He stopped when he saw the chains on the women's wrists. Just stopped. Stood there. Stared. For 5 full seconds, he didn't move. Didn't speak. Just looked at the metal restraints cutting into 76 pairs of wrists. Then he turned to a younger officer standing next to him. A lieutenant. Younger man, maybe 30. Garrett's voice was firm, quiet, but absolutely certain. "Get those off. Now." The lieutenant hesitated. He glanced at his clipboard. "Sir, the regulations state that prisoners in transit should remain—" Garrett cut him off. His voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. "They're not escaping anywhere, and they're not animals. Remove them." 10 minutes later, all 76 women had their chains removed. Maggie touched her wrists. The skin was raw, bloody, covered in scabs and dried blood. But the metal was gone. She couldn't speak, couldn't find words. She'd worn those chains for 192 hours, 8 full days, through 5 countries, across an ocean. She thought she'd wear them forever, or until something worse happened. Now they were gone, and the man who ordered them removed had said 4 words that wouldn't leave her mind. "They're not animals." Liesl started crying quietly. She put her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook. She'd been holding herself together for so long. 8 days of chains, 8 days of waiting for the horror to begin. Now the chains were off, and she couldn't hold it together anymore. Anna stood very still. Her mind was racing. They called us not animals. Who does that? What kind of enemy says that? What kind of soldier looks at prisoners and sees human beings instead of threats to be controlled? The processing happened in a heated building. Each woman gave her name and information to a clerk with a typewriter. Then they were taken to a delousing station. This was the part they'd all dreaded. The propaganda had very specific warnings about this, about what would happen when they were forced to strip to shower to be exposed and vulnerable. But it was done professionally. The women were given privacy where possible. Female nurses supervised. No one was rough or cruel. It was efficient, medical, nothing more. After delousing, each woman received fresh clothing, American military surplus, men's shirts and trousers too big for most of them but clean. The clothes smelled like soap, real soap, chemical soap, not the ersatz garbage they'd been using in Germany. Maggie held a shirt up to her face and breathed in. When was the last time anything she owned smelled this clean? Then came the showers, hot water, actual soap. Liesl stood under the water for a long time. This was her first real shower in 12 days, maybe longer. She'd lost track. The hot water ran down her back, over her shoulders, through her hair. She watched the dirt swirl down the drain, watched it disappear. Something inside her broke, not in a bad way, in a way that let something else in, something she couldn't name yet. Hope, maybe, or confusion, or both at once. A medical officer examined Liesl's shoulder wound afterward. The officer was a woman. Captain. Her name tag said Walsh, probably Irish-American heritage. She spoke some German. Enough. "This is healing well," Captain Walsh said, touching the wound gently. "We will check it every week. If you have pain, you tell us right away." "Yes." Her voice was kind, professional, matter of fact. Liesl could only nod. The first meal on American soil came next. The mess hall was warm, heated. Each woman received a metal tray divided into sections. On that tray was 8 ounces of beef stew, real beef, visible chunks of meat, carrots, potatoes, thick gravy, 2 slices of bread with real butter, yellow butter, soft, not margarine, tea with sugar. Take as much sugar as you want. A small portion of canned fruit, peaches in syrup. Maggie looked at the food. She did the calculation in her head. Her mother had trained her to calculate calories during the war. Everyone did to make rations last. This was about 850 calories in one meal, more food than Maggie had seen in a single sitting for 6 months. Liesel ate slowly. She kept expecting someone to take it away, someone to tell her it was a mistake, someone to snatch the tray and laugh. No one did. She ate everything, every bite. Her stomach felt full for the first time in so long she couldn't remember what fullness felt like. Anna watched the guards eating. They ate from the same kitchen, the same food. They weren't eating better meals while giving prisoners scraps. Everyone got the same thing. Guards and prisoners ate identical food. This was written in some rule somewhere, Anna realized. Some code of conduct. Geneva Convention. She'd heard of it before the war. Rules for treating prisoners. They were actually following it. Not bending it. Not interpreting it loosely. Following it exactly. Later that day they were loaded onto buses. Not trucks. Buses with seats. They were going to an internment camp. The guard said it was called Camp Aliceville in Alabama, about 800 miles west. The 76 women were divided among 3 buses. Maggie, Liesel and Anna ended up together again. The journey took hours. The women stared out the windows the whole time, watching America pass by. They saw small towns, intact, functioning, children playing in schoolyards, gas stations with fuel, store windows with goods displayed inside, farms with healthy cows and horses. "How is this possible?" Liesel whispered. "They're supposed to be suffering too." Nobody answered, because nobody had an answer. Anna did math in her head. If this was an economy on the verge of collapse, if these were people barely holding on, what did that make Germany? What did that make everything they'd been told? They reached Camp Aliceville on May 7th, 1945. From outside it looked like a prison camp. Double fences, guard towers, barbed wire. This looked familiar. This matched expectations. But when the bus drove through the gates, things looked different inside. Rows of wooden barracks stood in neat lines. About 600 prisoners were already here. Mostly men, German and Italian. The women's section was separate, its own compound within the main camp. 6 barracks built specifically for female prisoners. Capacity 120. With the new arrivals, there were now 94 women total. Maggie, Liesel and Anna were assigned to Barracks 3. 24 women would live here together. Inside, there were double bunk beds, 12 sets total. Each woman got 2 blankets, a pillow and sheets. Clean sheets, white cotton. There were small foot lockers for personal items. A wood-burning stove sat in the center of the room. The windows had real glass. Electric lights hung from the ceiling. Maggie touched the mattress. An actual mattress. Not straw, not rags stuffed in a sack. A real mattress with padding, with springs. She thought of her family back in Hamburg. They'd slept on floor mats all last winter because their beds had been destroyed in the bombing. Dinner was served at 6 o'clock in the women's mess hall. Potato soup, bread, margarine, tea. The portions were adequate, not generous, but not starvation either. A woman named Helga had been at the camp for 3 weeks already. She sat near them during dinner. She told them about the daily routine, work assignments, letters home, rules and schedules. "It's not what we expected," Helga said quietly. "They follow rules. The Geneva Convention, they call it. They follow it exactly." Maggie didn't believe her. This had to be temporary. A trick. They were being softened up for something worse. That night, lights went out at 10 o'clock. Maggie lay in her bunk staring at the dark ceiling. She touched her wrists where the chains had been. The skin was still tender, still raw. Liesel whispered from the bunk below, Do you think we're actually safe here?" No one answered for a long time. Anna finally spoke from her bunk across the room. "I don't know what to think anymore." She thought of her children in Austria, Maria and Klaus. She thought of the chains being removed. She thought of those 4 words. They're not animals. These people were supposed to destroy them. The propaganda had been very clear about that. Enemy soldiers would rape and murder captured women, would torture them for information, would treat them as less than human. Instead, they'd shown them something else. Something Anna didn't have a name for yet. Something that made all her certainties feel like lies. Outside, the Alabama night was warm. Crickets chirped in the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Inside, barracks. 324 German women tried to sleep, tried to understand what was happening to them. The cognitive dissonance was just beginning. The real transformation hadn't started yet, but it would, soon. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same. The wake-up bell rang at 6:30 in the morning. Maggie opened her eyes. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she remembered. America, Alabama, a prison camp. But she'd slept in a real bed, under clean blankets. The mattress had actual padding. She sat up slowly, touching her wrists. The skin was still raw where the chains had been, but healing. 8 days of metal cutting into flesh doesn't heal overnight. Breakfast came at 7 o'clock. Porridge with a little sugar, bread, jam, tea. More food than Maggie ate most mornings back in Germany during the final year of the war. She still couldn't finish it all. Her stomach had shrunk from months of not eating enough. Roll call happened at 8 o'clock. The women stood in lines outside the barracks. A guard counted them. He was polite, didn't yell, didn't treat them like criminals. The whole thing took 10 minutes. Then work assignments began at 8:30. Maggie was assigned to the camp laundry. Liesel went to the kitchen light duty because her shoulder was still healing. Anna was sent to the administrative office. Someone had noticed she had education and good handwriting. The laundry facility was unlike anything Maggie had ever seen. Industrial washing machines lined one wall, powered by electricity. Hot water flowed from pipes at the turn of a handle. The supervisor said they processed 400 pounds of laundry every day. 400 pounds. Maggie had washed clothes by hand her whole life. Cold water from a pump. Harsh soap that burned her hands and left scars on her knuckles. She still had the marks. 2 civilian supervisors ran the laundry, both women. One was named Mrs. Evelyn Pritchard. She was about 52 years old. Her husband was overseas with the American Army fighting in Europe, fighting Germans. She should hate us, Maggie thought. Her husband is risking his life against people like me. But Mrs. Pritchard just showed them how to use the machines. She was kind but firm, professional. There was no hatred in her eyes, no cruelty, just work to be done. This confused Maggie more than cruelty would have. One morning, Mrs. Pritchard asked Maggie where she was from. Hamburg, Maggie answered quietly. Mrs. Pritchard nodded. Beautiful city. I hope it survives the war. Maggie froze. Hamburg had been bombed heavily by British and American planes. Tens of thousands of people had died in the firestorms. Entire neighborhoods were ash. And this woman hoped it survived. It didn't make sense. In the kitchen, Liesel discovered something that shattered her understanding of the world. The storage room was huge. Floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with food, canned goods, vegetables, fruits, meat, soup, beans. Enough food to feed her entire village for months. And this was just one camp. Sergeant Wade Calloway caught her staring. He was a big man with a loud voice but kind eyes. Supply sergeant, probably 40 years old. First time seeing this much food, eh? He said. Liesel could only nod. Her throat was too tight to speak. He shrugged like it was nothing. America's the breadbasket. We grow more than we can eat. He showed her the delivery schedule. Flour by the ton, sugar in 50-pound sacks, coffee beans in barrels, canned vegetables, fresh meat delivered weekly. The numbers made no sense to Liesel. They'd starved back home. She'd watched her little brother cry himself to sleep from hunger. She'd seen her mother make soup from tree bark because there was nothing else. And all that time they'd been told the Allies were starving worse, that America was on the verge of collapse, that their enemies were suffering just like they were worse even. The math was simple now, brutal, undeniable. She'd been lied to about everything. Anna worked in the administrative office, processing mail and keeping records. The office had typewriters, carbon paper, filing cabinets with organized files. Each prisoner had a folder. Inside was their capture date, health information, work assignment, any disciplinary issues. On the wall hung a poster, the Geneva Convention, printed in both English and German. Article 25 said prisoners must be kept in conditions as good as the soldiers guarding them. Anna read it 3 times. Then she looked around the office, at the organized systems, at the professional procedures, at the way everything functioned with casual efficiency. The camp really was following these rules. Exactly. Not better, not worse. Just exactly as written. This wasn't propaganda. This wasn't temporary. This was standard operating procedure. Lunch came at noon. Soup, a sandwich, sometimes fruit if they had it. Then recreation time from 1 to 3 in the afternoon. The women's compound had a volleyball court, a small library, benches to sit on, gardens that earlier prisoners had planted. The library held 47 books in German. Local German-American families had donated them. Maggie found a copy of Goethe. She held it like treasure. The last time she'd read for pleasure was 2 years ago, maybe longer. Liesel watched the guards during their break time. They joked with each other, shared cigarettes. One guard tossed a baseball back and forth with another. They looked bored, normal, like regular people doing a regular job. In the evening, prisoners could write letters, 1 letter per week. The letters were read by censors, but then sent to the Red Cross. The Red Cross would forward them to Germany. Anna wrote to her children first. She couldn't tell them exactly where she was, couldn't say too much, but she told them she was safe, fed, unhurt. She wanted to write more, wanted to say the enemy was treating her better than her own army had this past year. But how could she tell children that? She settled for simple words. I am being cared for. Do not worry. I will come home to you. Maggie wrote to her mother in Hamburg. The letter was stiff and formal. I am a prisoner but well. The conditions are acceptable. I maintain my duty to the fatherland. She didn't mention the chains being removed, didn't mention the food or the kindness. She couldn't reconcile any of it with what she believed, so she wrote nothing about it. Liesel wrote to her parents on their farm in Bavaria. Her letter was honest and simple. I am safe. They feed us. No one has hurt me. I think of home every day. Then she added one more line before she could stop herself. The guards removed our chains and apologized for them. I don't understand this war anymore. Dinner came at 5:30. Similar portions to lunch. After dinner was free time until lights out. The women in Barracks 3 talked quietly. Different perspectives emerged. The older women adapted faster. They'd seen more of life. They were more skeptical of what they'd been told. The younger women struggled. Their whole worldview was cracking apart. A woman named Erica spoke up one evening. She was 44, a former nurse. She'd been at Stalingrad as a medical auxiliary. I saw our boys freeze, starve, die by the thousands, Erica said. We were told it was necessary sacrifice, that the Allies suffered just as much. She gestured around the warm barracks, toward the stocked kitchen outside. Does this look like suffering to you? The silence said everything. Maggie lay awake that second night in camp. She replayed everything in her mind. The chains removed, Mrs. Pritchard's kindness about Hamburg, the industrial machines, the abundance of food, the casual efficiency of everything. Her belief system said Germans were superior, the master race, destined to rule. Therefore the Allies must be weak, inferior, struggling to survive against German strength. But the evidence showed something completely different. The Allies had more than Germany ever had. They had better equipment, more food, functioning systems, and they treated prisoners with dignity. They followed written rules, even when those rules protected their enemies. A thought crept into Maggie's mind. A dangerous thought she tried to push away. What if we were lied to about some things, just some things, not everything, surely not everything? But the thought stayed there, growing stronger every hour. Liesel stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. By the third day, she accepted that this was real. They really were going to feed her. They really weren't going to hurt her. This wasn't a trick. This was just how things were here. Sergeant Calloway taught her how to make bread the American way. He showed her measurements, techniques, the proper temperature for rising. She laughed while kneading dough. Actually laughed. Then she felt guilty for laughing. How could she laugh? Germany had surrendered well, would surrender soon. Her country was destroyed. People were dying. Calloway noticed her face change. "It's okay to laugh, kid," he said gently. "War's almost over anyway." Over? Liesl looked up. She didn't know how close the end was. "Yeah, maybe a week, maybe less. Then you can go home, start over." Liesl thought about that. Going home, starting over. What would that even mean? Anna kept investigating through her office work. Camp Aliceville held 630 prisoners currently. 12 other camps existed across America. About 34,000 German prisoners total, all treated according to the same Geneva Convention rules. She found a note in one file that made her stomach drop. May 1945, news of German surrender to be announced gradually to prevent psychological crisis among prisoners. Germany had surrendered, or was about to. Any day now. Anna said nothing to the others. Not yet. 1 week passed. May 7th, 1945. Routine had been established. Work, meals, letters, sleep. Maggie still resisted accepting reality, but questions gnawed at her constantly. Liesl was adapting, finding small moments of peace in the rhythm of daily life. Anna watched everything, understanding more than she wanted to. That evening, the camp commandant called an assembly. All prisoners to the main yard. An announcement was coming. The 3 women stood together in the warm Alabama evening. The temperature was about 75 degrees. A gentle breeze came from the east. Maggie whispered, "What now?" Anna knew, but she didn't say it out loud. Everything was about to change again. All 630 prisoners stood in the main yard. It was 6 o'clock in the evening. The women's section stood separate from the men, but everyone could see each other. Camp Commandant Colonel Davies walked to a wooden podium. A German-American corporal stood next to him. Corporal Ernst Waldmann. He would translate. Maggie's stomach felt tight. This felt like bad news. Something terrible was coming. She could sense it. Colonel Davies cleared his throat. He spoke in English first. Corporal Waldmann translated sentence by sentence. "I have an announcement regarding the European war." Everyone went silent. 630 people holding their breath. "At 2:41 this morning, May 7th, Germany signed unconditional surrender to Allied forces in Reims, France." A pause. The translator's words hung in the air like smoke. "The war in Europe is over." The silence lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then reactions exploded across the yard. Some German men wept openly. Some stood rigid like statues. Some collapsed to their knees. Among the women, the younger ones cried. The older ones went very still. Maggie's legs almost gave out beneath her. Liesl grabbed her arm to steady her. Anna closed her eyes. She'd known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. Colonel Davies continued speaking. "You will remain here as prisoners of war until repatriation arrangements are made with the occupation government of Germany. This could take months or longer." He paused. "You will continue to be treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention. Your families will be notified of your status through the Red Cross." His voice softened slightly. "I know this is difficult news. Chaplain and medical staff are available if you need them." Then he added something unexpected. "Many of you will have questions about what's happening at home. We will provide what information we can." He dismissed the assembly. The prisoners walked back to their barracks in silence. Shock hung over the camp like fog. Back in barracks, 3 24 women tried to process what they'd just heard. Some were hysterical. "What happens to us now?" they cried. Some were angry. "They're lying. Germany cannot be defeated." Some sat in silence, unable to speak. Maggie sat on her bunk, shaking. The 1,000-year Reich, inevitable victory, German superiority, everything she'd believed her entire adult life. All of it was gone. Just gone, like it never existed. Liesel asked the question everyone was thinking. What happens to Germany now? No one had an answer. An hour later, something strange happened. Mrs. Pritchard appeared at the barracks door. This was unusual. Civilians rarely entered the living quarters. She carried a cardboard box. Corporal Waldman came with her. He would translate. Inside the box were packages of tea, biscuits, and chocolate bars. Mrs. Pritchard spoke slowly so Corporal Waldman could keep up with the translation. "I know today is hard," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady. "I lost my son John in France 2 years ago, April 1943. He was 22 years old." Some women looked up. Maggie stared at her. "War is terrible for everyone," Mrs. Pritchard continued. "It takes people we love. It breaks things that can't be fixed." She paused, then walked through the barracks handing out the treats from her box. Real Hershey's chocolate bars. American chocolate. Maggie would remember this moment for the next 58 years, until the day she died in 2003. Mrs. Pritchard stopped at Maggie's bunk. She set a chocolate bar on the blanket. Then she did something unexpected. She patted Maggie's shoulder gently, like a mother would, like someone who cared. "You're young," Mrs. Pritchard said through the translator. "You have a future ahead of you. Don't waste it on bitterness." Then she left quietly. The door closed behind her. Maggie held the chocolate bar in her hands. This woman's son had died fighting Germans, Germans like Maggie. Maybe her son died fighting Maggie's own countrymen, her comrades, men she'd sent messages to through her Signal Corps work, and this woman brought them chocolate on the day their world ended. Something fundamental broke inside Maggie, not her spirit, something deeper, something that had been holding her beliefs together like mortar between bricks. The chocolate bar sat in her hands. She could feel the weight of it. Maybe 2 ounces. Brown paper wrapper with silver lettering. Hershey's. She lifted it to her nose, breathed in. Sweet, rich, the smell of childhood. Birthday cakes her mother made before the war. Happiness, safety, a world that didn't exist anymore. The wrapper crinkled as her hands trembled. She thought about Mrs. Pritchard's son, 22 years old, dead in France. April 1943. She thought about the messages she'd sent from her communications bunker. Coordinates, orders, information that helped German units fight, that helped them kill Allied soldiers. Maybe she'd helped kill him. Maybe her work had contributed to his death in some small way. And his mother brought her chocolate. Maggie broke off 1 square, put it in her mouth. The taste hit her immediately. First sweetness, pure sugar dissolving on her tongue, then creaminess, milk fat coating her mouth, then cocoa. That bitter edge beneath the sweetness. The texture was solid at first, then it started melting from her body heat, coating her throat like warm silk as she swallowed. She closed her eyes. A flashback came unbidden. She was 8 years old again. Hamburg before the war. Her birthday. Her mother had made chocolate cake. Real chocolate, expensive even then. The whole family gathered around the table. Her father, her younger brother, everyone smiling, the taste of cocoa. Exactly like this. Back to the present. Her mother was alone in bombed Hamburg now, if she was even still alive. Maggie hadn't heard from her in 3 months. Eating what? If anything. The last letter said food rations were down to 600 calories per day for women, barely enough to survive, while Maggie sat in an American prison camp eating chocolate given by a woman whose son she'd helped kill. The emotional devastation was complete. She wanted to spit the chocolate out, wanted to throw it away, wanted to refuse this kindness because she didn't deserve it. But she couldn't, because it tasted too good. That was the worst part. The chocolate tasted like heaven, and she wanted more. The survivor's guilt crashed over her like a wave. I'm eating chocolate while Mother starves. I'm a prisoner being shown kindness while we showed none. I'm alive while Mrs. Pritchard's son is dead. The chocolate stuck in her throat, not from the texture, from shame. She finished the square anyway, licked the residue from her fingers, hated herself for it, and couldn't stop. That night, no one in Barracks 3 slept. Whispered conversations filled the darkness. Liesl asked, "My parents' farm. Do you think it's still there?" Another woman said, "My husband was on the Eastern Front. If Germany surrendered, what happened to him?" Finally, Maggie spoke. Her voice was quiet but clear. "We were told the Allies would destroy Germany, rape and pillage, take revenge for everything we'd done." She paused. "They removed our chains. They feed us. They gave us chocolate when our nation died." Her voice cracked. "What does that mean?" Anna answered from her bunk. "It means everything we were taught was a lie." The next morning, May 8th, the routine continued. Wake up, breakfast, work assignments. But everything felt different. The world had ended yesterday, yet the machines in the laundry still needed running. The bread in the kitchen still needed baking. Routine as an anchor in chaos. Maggie reported to the laundry. Mrs. Pritchard showed her how to operate the pressing machine. "You're good with your hands," Mrs. Pritchard said. "You were a teacher before you said—" Maggie nodded. "You'll teach again. Germany will need good teachers after this." "After what?" Mrs. Pritchard's face became serious. "After they clean up the camps." "Camps. The concentration camps. The news is coming out now. What they did to people there." Maggie felt cold despite the heat from the pressing machine. "That's propaganda. Allied lies to make us look bad." Mrs. Pritchard's face hardened. "I wish it was, dear. I truly wish it was." Sunday, May 13th, 1945. 7 o'clock in the morning. Maggie entered the kitchen for her rotation shift. All prisoners rotated through different work assignments weekly. This week she was assigned to kitchen duty alongside Liesl, and she smelled something that stopped her in her tracks. Bacon. She'd smelled bacon before, Hamburg before the war. Her father cooked it on special occasions, birthdays, Christmas. But that was years ago, a lifetime ago. This was different. This was overwhelming. The smell hit her in layers. First layer salt, sharp, clean, cutting through the air like a physical presence. Not table salt. Sea salt cured into meat over months. Primal, ancient. Second layer smoke, wood smoke. Hickory, she thought, though she wasn't sure. Sweet smoke that didn't burn the nose. The smell of preservation, of care taken over time. Third layer fat, pork fat rendering, liquefying. That specific scent of animal fat hitting hot cast iron. Rich, almost overwhelming. The smell of abundance. Fourth layer, caramelization. Sugar in the meat browning at the edges. That borderline burnt sweetness. The smell of something becoming more than it was. The combination smelled like peace. Like a world where people had enough to waste the edges. Like safety she'd forgotten existed. Sergeant Calloway stood at the industrial range. 6 cast-iron skillets, each 14 inches wide. In each skillet, 12 strips of bacon. 72 strips total, for Sunday breakfast, for prisoners. Maggie's mind couldn't process it. 72 strips of bacon. Her entire family in Hamburg hadn't seen that much meat in 2 years combined. "Ever cooked bacon before?" Calloway asked. Maggie shook her head. Couldn't speak. The smell was too strong. The cognitive dissonance too severe. "Here." He handed her metal tongs. "Flip 'em when the edges curl up. Don't let 'em burn. Low and slow, that's the secret." She stepped to the stove on trembling legs. The strips lay in the pans, pink and white striped, marbled fat running through lean meat, already sizzling. Fat bubbled around the edges, clear, golden, pooling in the low spots of the skillets. The edges were starting to brown, to crisp, to transform. The sound was constant, a sizzle like rain on hot pavement, small pops as fat bubbles burst, the crackle of water leaving meat, the sound of transformation. She used the tongs, flipped one strip. The underside was perfect brown, crispy edges, still soft center. Fat rendered, but not gone. Exactly right. "You eat yet?" Calloway asked. She shook her head. "Try a piece. Can't cook bacon if you don't know what good bacon tastes like. That's the rule." He pulled one finished strip from a completed skillet, laid it on a metal plate, handed it to her. Maggie stared at it. One strip of bacon, maybe 2 ounces of meat. In Hamburg, this would cost a week's wages. If you could find it at all, which you couldn't. Not for 2 years now. "Go on," Calloway said gently. "It's good. I promise." She lifted the strip, still hot. Grease glistened on the surface, catching the kitchen lights. She bit down. The texture hit her first. Crispy outer layer, shattering between her teeth like glass made of meat. Like something impossibly delicate and impossibly rich at the same time. Beneath that soft inner layer, yielding, melting slightly from residual heat and from the warmth of her mouth. The fat, oh God, the fat, coating her tongue, coating her teeth, coating her throat as she chewed, like warm silk, like liquid luxury. Then the taste exploded. Salt, immediate, overwhelming, not harsh, perfect. The salt content exactly calibrated to make her want more, activating every taste bud at once. Fat. Pork fat has a specific taste, not like butter, not like oil, richer than both, almost sweet. The fat carried everything else, carried the salt, carried the smoke flavor deep into her palate. The meat itself. Pork muscle beneath the fat, savory, that umami richness. The slight char from the edges adding a bitter note that balanced the fat perfectly, and underneath everything the smoke, hickory smoke flavor lingering, reminding her that this meat had been preserved, had been cared for, had been made with intention and skill. She swallowed. The fat slid down her throat, warm, coating, comfortable in a way she'd almost forgotten food could be. And then came the flashback, involuntary, unstoppable. Hamburg, December 1944. Just 5 months ago, though it felt like another lifetime. Her mother boiling tree bark for soup, actual tree bark stripped from trees in the park, boiled for hours to make it soft enough to eat. Her little brother crying himself to sleep, his stomach cramping from hunger. 7 years old, bones visible through his skin. Her father's ration 800 calories per day. Adult male, supposed to work in a factory, on 800 calories. Her mother's ration 600 calories per day. Adult female, barely enough to survive. Tree bark soup. It tasted like wood, obviously, because it was wood. No nutrition, no calories, just filled the stomach temporarily with fiber that gave everyone diarrhea afterward. They ate it anyway, because the alternative was emptiness. Back to the present, the kitchen in Alabama, warm, clean, bacon sizzling in 6 skillets, the smell of abundance filling the air. Maggie stood there with bacon grease on her lips, 72 strips cooking, for one Sunday breakfast, for prisoners, 2,200 calories per day given freely to enemies, while her mother, if she was still alive, ate bark. The devastation was complete. The bacon tasted so good. That was the worst part. She wasn't forcing it down, wasn't enduring it as punishment. It tasted like heaven, and she wanted more. The survivor's guilt hit her like a physical blow. I'm eating bacon while mother eats bark. I'm a prisoner. She's free. The enemy feeds me better than my own country fed its citizens. What does that mean? What does any of this mean? She finished the strip anyway. Her hands moved without her permission, brought the remaining bacon to her mouth, chewed, swallowed, licked the grease from her fingers, hated herself for it, hated herself for enjoying it, hated herself for wanting another piece, and couldn't stop. "Good right," Calloway said, smiling, not cruelly, just happy that someone appreciated good bacon. Maggie could only nod. Her throat was too tight to speak. She turned back to the skillets, flipped strips mechanically, watched them cook, watched abundance sizzle in American kitchens while people starved in German cities. The cognitive dissonance was complete. Everything she'd been told was a lie. Not just some things. Everything. Over the next week, newspapers arrived at the camp. They were censored for security, but they contained information. Articles about liberated concentration camps. Photographs from Bergen-Belsen, from Dachau, from places Maggie had never heard of. Anna saw them first in the administrative office. She felt physically sick looking at the pictures. Piles of bodies. Skeletal survivors with hollow eyes. Children who looked like walking skeletons. The evidence was undeniable, even in censored newspapers, even in photographs that might have been staged. There was too much. Too many sources. Too many witnesses. Too much documentation. Some women refused to look. "Enemy propaganda," they shouted. Some looked but couldn't process what they saw. Their minds rejected it. Anna forced herself to read every word, to look at every photograph. She thought of her husband who died fighting on the Eastern Front, fighting for this, dying for this. "What did you die for, Carl?" she whispered to his memory. What were we all dying for? 2 weeks after the surrender announcement, Maggie reached her breaking point. It was May 23rd, a normal workday in the laundry. Mrs. Pritchard's sister came to visit. She brought her nephew with her, a little boy about 8 years old. He was visiting from Birmingham. Blonde hair, bright eyes, full of energy and innocence. He waved at Maggie through the window, just waved, a friendly gesture from a child. She waved back without thinking. Mrs. Pritchard saw and smiled. "He likes everyone. Good kid." And something in Maggie snapped. Not broke. Snapped into place. Or snapped apart. She couldn't tell which. The kindness. The normalcy. The simple humanity of a child waving at a stranger. Set against everything she'd taught. Everything she'd believed. Everything she'd seen in those newspaper photographs. She excused herself. Told Mrs. Pritchard she needed the washroom. Walked to the latrine building. Entered a stall. Closed the door. Sat down on the toilet lid. Put her hands over her face. And cried. The sobs came from somewhere deep. Somewhere Maggie didn't know existed inside her. The sound layers built around her in that small bathroom stall. Distant. The washing machines running in the laundry room. Steady mechanical rhythm. Medium women talking in German somewhere outside. Muffled voices through walls. Close, her own breathing. Getting faster, shorter, almost gasping. Internal. Her heartbeat pounding in her ears like drums. The flashbacks came in rapid cuts, like photographs shuffling too fast. Hamburg, 1943. Her classroom. Children sitting at wooden desks. She's 20 years old, young, idealistic, believing every word she teaches. "Today we learn about our enemies," she says, her voice confident, clear. "The people who want to destroy Germany." The children draw propaganda posters. American soldiers with fangs, British soldiers with claws, subhuman creatures, monsters. Maggie walks between the desks, smiling, praising their work. "Excellent, Hans. Very good, Greta. You understand perfectly." She hangs the posters on the classroom wall, stands back to admire them, back to the present. The bathroom stall. Alabama. May 1945. The boy waving. Blonde hair. 8 years old. Innocent smile. No different from the children she taught. No different at all. Another flashback. The newspaper photographs from last week. Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Children behind wire fences. Skeletal. Eyes hollow. Barely alive. German camps. Her country's camps. Done in her name. done while she taught children that Germans were superior. The connection hit her like a physical blow. She taught German children that other children were subhuman, while German camps starved children to death. And now an enemy child waved at her with pure kindness. The physical collapse was complete, shoulders shaking violently, hands pressed over her mouth to muffle the sound. She couldn't breathe properly. Gasping between sobs, tears ran down her face, into her mouth. She tasted salt mixing with the residue of bacon grease still on her lips from breakfast, the taste of shame, chocolate from days ago, bacon from this morning, tears, all mixing together. Words came out in German, broken, choked. Was hab ich getan? Was hab ich getan? What have I done? What have I done? Over and over, a prayer, a confession, an admission of guilt she couldn't take back. 10 minutes passed, maybe longer, until no more tears would come, until her breathing slowed to something approaching normal, until she could see clearly again through swollen eyes. She stood on shaking legs, walked to the sink, washed her face with cold water, looked in the mirror. Red eyes, blotchy face, broken person staring back. But something was different, not better, not healed, not forgiven. Clear. For the first time since childhood, she saw clearly. The decision formed in that moment. Simple. Absolute. I can't undo what I did. I taught lies to children. I believed every word. I can't fix that. But I can make sure I never teach lies again. Starting now. Starting here. No matter what it costs. She dried her face, straightened her borrowed American uniform, took a deep breath, walked back to the laundry. Mrs. Pritchard looked concerned. "You all right, dear?" Maggie nodded, and for the first time since her capture, she meant it. That evening in Barracks 3, Maggie spoke for the first time about what she was feeling. "I was a teacher," she said quietly. 24 women listened. "I taught children that Germans were superior, that our enemies were less than human. I believed every single word I said." She looked at her hands, turned them over, studied the scars on her knuckles from washing clothes in cold water, the raw skin on her wrists from 8 days in chains. "These hands taught lies to children," Anna responded from her bunk. "Then use them to teach truth now." "How?" Maggie's voice broke. "How do I go back and face what we've done?" Liesel, always practical, said simply, "One day at a time, starting here, starting now." That night, Maggie wrote a different kind of letter to her mother, an honest one. The words came slowly, each sentence a confession. "Mother Germany has surrendered. I am a prisoner in America, but I am treated with more dignity here than I saw in our own country this past year. The guards removed our chains and called us human beings. Our enemy did this. I don't know what this means yet, but I know everything we believed was wrong. The concentration camps were real. I've seen the photographs. I've read the testimonies. What was done in our name. The Americans here treat us with more humanity than we showed to others. This shames me. But it also gives me hope that humanity still exists, even after what we've done. I am afraid of what comes next, but I am alive, and I am finally thinking clearly. Your daughter Maggie." She sealed the letter, handed it to the censor the next morning. It might never reach Hamburg. The postal system in Germany was destroyed. Her mother might be dead. But Maggie needed to write it anyway, needed to put the truth into words. The transformation had begun. June arrived. The Alabama heat grew intense. Temperatures above 90 degrees most days. The women of Barracks 3 had divided into 3 distinct groups now. 8 women still denied reality. They blamed leadership, not ideology. "We were betrayed by weak generals," they said. The ideas were right. The execution failed. 7 women accepted defeat, but remained bitter. They wanted to go home, forget everything, never speak of it again. 9 women had transformed completely. This group included Maggie Liesel and Anna. They called themselves Die Erwachten, the awakened ones, half joke, half serious. They formed a study group, practiced English together. The camp offered voluntary classes twice a week. A local volunteer taught them. Her name was Miss Dorothy Fairchild. She was 45 years old, a librarian from town, never married. She'd taught English to immigrants before the war. 34 prisoners signed up for the classes. Anna joined immediately. She already knew some English from before. Liesl signed up too, though she was nervous about learning. Maggie hesitated at first. Learning the enemy's language felt like betrayal, but betrayal of what a regime that had lied about everything. She signed up in the second week. Miss Fairchild was patient, encouraging. She brought picture books and simple newspapers, easy readers designed for children. Anna excelled quickly. Her legal background helped. She understood grammar structure. Liesl struggled with pronunciation, but she tried hard. Every class she tried. Maggie discovered something wonderful. She loved teaching again. She helped other students practice their letters and words, explained grammar points, made learning easier for those who struggled. For the first time in months, she felt useful, not just useful good, like she was doing something right. The camp also offered community service opportunities, volunteer work in the nearby town of Aliceville under guard supervision. The women of Barracks 3 wrote a collective letter to Colonel Davies. "We request permission to work in the local community. We wish to contribute something positive before we leave." The response came 1 week later. Approved. 12 women from Barracks 3 were selected, Maggie, Liesl and Anna among them. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon they worked 3-hour shifts in town. 2 guards escorted them. This was the first time they'd interacted with regular American civilians beyond guards and supervisors. Maggie was assigned to help at the local hospital. She worked in the hospital laundry, familiar work. But she also helped with German-speaking patients. Some elderly German-American residents needed someone who spoke their language. One patient was a woman named Mrs. Ingrid Schaefer, 71 years old. She'd immigrated from Bavaria in 1905, 40 years in America. One day, Mrs. Schaefer told Maggie about her grandson. His name was Eric. He'd been killed in France in April 1945, just weeks before the war ended. Maggie expected hatred when she heard this, expected the old woman to blame her, to curse her. Instead, Mrs. Schaefer said, "The war took my Eric, but hating all Germans won't bring him back." "I'm sorry," Maggie whispered. "I'm so sorry for what we did." "You didn't kill him, girl." Mrs. Schaefer's voice was firm. "But you can honor his memory by being better than what Germany became." Maggie visited Mrs. Schaefer every week after that. A bond formed between them. The old woman told her about the German-American community, how they'd struggled during the war, faced discrimination, had to prove constantly they weren't the enemy. "You'll have to do the same thing," Mrs. Schaefer said. "When you go home, prove you're different now. Prove Germany can be different." Liesl worked at the community garden. She helped local families maintain their victory gardens, vegetables grown to supplement wartime rations. American farm families were curious about her. They asked questions about Germany, about farming in Bavaria, about her life. She answered honestly, told them about poverty, about propaganda, about joining the military because the army fed her 3 meals a day. One farmer she worked with regularly was Mr. Cornelius Tucker, 58 years old, Scottish-American heritage, American. He'd lost his brother at Pearl Harbor in December 1941. He should have hated her, should have resented working alongside an enemy, but he treated her like a fellow farmer, showed her American techniques for growing turnips, asked about Bavarian methods for crop rotation. "This country has scars too," Mr. Tucker said one afternoon while they planted. "We lost people. We suffered. But we heal by building, not hating." Liesl thought about that while her hands worked the soil. Building instead of hating. Was that possible? Anna worked at the town library. She helped reorganize the German language collection. The librarian was Miss Fairchild, the same woman who taught English classes at the camp. 45 years old, intelligent, kind. Anna discovered something important at the library. They'd kept German literature throughout the war. Goethe, Schiller, Thomas Mann, the good parts of German culture. "We don't ban whole cultures," Miss Fairchild explained. We ban specific dangerous ideas. German culture isn't the same as Nazi ideology. They discussed literature and philosophy during slow afternoons. Anna realized something profound. German culture could be separated from Nazi crimes. Her children could be proud of Beethoven and Goethe without carrying Hitler's guilt. Your children can love German music and literature, Miss Fairchild said. They don't have to carry the weight of what the Nazis did. They just have to make sure it never happens again. September came. Letters from home finally arrived through the Red Cross. 2 months to travel from Germany to America. The postal system was destroyed. Everything took time. Maggie received a letter from her mother. She held the envelope for a long time before opening it, afraid of what it might say. The news was bad, but not catastrophic. Hamburg was 50% destroyed by bombing. The British occupation zone. Her mother was surviving in a partially damaged apartment building. Food was scarce, but the British were providing rations. Her younger brother was alive. Her father had died in an air raid last year. Her mother's tone was defeated, exhausted. Come home when you can. We need you here. Liesel's letter from her father brought better news. The farm was intact. They were in the American occupation zone. The Americans had taken some livestock as reparations, but paid for it. The village had only light damage. Her father wrote, "We are ashamed of what Germany did, but we are glad you are alive. Come home. We love you." Anna's letter came from her sister, who was caring for the children in Austria. Maria and Klaus were safe. They asked about their mother constantly. They didn't fully understand what had happened. They just knew Mother was away. "They need you," her sister wrote. "Come soon." Repatriation planning began in October. The first wave of prisoners would go home soon. Priority order was clear. Mothers with young children under 10 years old, critically ill, elderly, then everyone else. Anna was selected for a December transport because her children were 6 and 9, both under 10. Maggie and Liesel would have to wait until February or March of 1946. All 3 women had mixed feelings about going home. They wanted to see their families, wanted to rebuild their lives, wanted to help Germany recover. But they'd grown used to safety here, to routine, to abundance, to being treated with dignity. What waited for them in Germany rubble? Occupation, shame, hunger. December 15th, 1945. Anna prepared to leave. She gathered her few belongings. The camp gave her travel papers, $20 American currency, a warm coat. She said goodbye to the women of Barracks 3, to Maggie and Liesel especially. To Maggie she said, "Teach truth. That's your purpose now. Don't waste it." To Liesel, "Don't forget how to laugh. The world needs joy even after all this." She hugged them both, then boarded a transport truck with 23 other women heading to the American occupation zone in Germany. The journey took 3 weeks. Train to New York, ship to Southampton, England, train through devastated Germany. Anna arrived in Hamburg on January 8, 1946. The destruction was beyond anything she'd imagined. Worse than photographs, worse than descriptions. Rubble everywhere. Entire blocks reduced to broken concrete and twisted metal. Displaced persons wandering the streets with blank faces. American soldiers maintaining order. She processed through a repatriation center. They gave her a food voucher, temporary papers, a travel permit to Austria. It took 5 more days to reach her children by train. The rail infrastructure was destroyed. Bridges were out. Trains ran on temporary schedules. But finally she reached the small Austrian village where her sister lived. Maria was 9 now. Klaus was 6. They barely remembered her. She barely recognized them, they'd grown so much. But they were alive. She'd kept her promise. She pulled them close and held them for a long time. Back at Camp Aliceville, Maggie and Liesel were among the last 40 women remaining. The camp felt empty now. Most prisoners had already gone home. They continued their work. Community service, English classes, preparing for the day they'd leave. Maggie was now fluent enough in English to have real conversations. Mrs. Pritchard made an unexpected offer one day in February. "If you ever want to come back to America," she said carefully, "write to me. My husband and I sponsor immigrants sometimes, after things settle down in Germany." Maggie was deeply touched. "I have to help rebuild Germany first. That's where I'm needed. But thank you. Thank you for everything." Sergeant Calloway said goodbye to Liesl on her last day in the kitchen. "Will you remember us, kid?" "I'll never forget you," Liesl said, tears in her eyes. "You taught me that people are people no matter what uniform they wear." He handed her a folded piece of paper. "My grandmother's recipe, butter tarts, Canadian specialty. Teach it to your mother." Liesl took it like it was made of gold. "I will. I promise." March 3rd, 1946. The last transport departed. 40 prisoners total, 14 women. Maggie and Liesl together until the very end. Major Garrett, the officer who'd ordered their chains removed 11 months ago, gave final words. "You arrived here as enemies," he said. "You leave as human beings who've learned hard truths. Use them well. Make sure nothing like this ever happens again." They boarded the train to New York. The ship crossing took 11 days, March 10th to 21st, the same duration as when they'd arrived. But everything was different now. No chains, no fear, only uncertainty about the future. They arrived in Bremenhaven, Germany on March 22nd. The devastation was overwhelming, worse than they'd imagined. Every city they passed through was ruins. They were interrogated about war crimes at a processing center. Both were cleared they'd been low-level personnel with no command authority. They received ration cards, travel permits, assignment to the American occupation zone. At the train station in Bremen, they said their final goodbye. Liesl's train headed south to Bavaria. Maggie's went to Hamburg. They exchanged addresses, promised to write. "We're sisters now," Maggie said, both crying. "War made us enemies, but truth made us sisters." They embraced one last time. The trains departed in opposite directions. Maggie arrived in Hamburg on March 25th. The city was unrecognizable. Maybe 20% of buildings still standing. The rest was rubble. She found her mother's apartment building, climbed 3 flights of damaged stairs, knocked on a battered door. Her mother opened it. She'd aged a decade. Thin, exhausted. Grey hair where there used to be brown. They stared at each other. "Mutti, I'm home." "Maggie, my girl." Her mother's voice broke. "You're alive. Thank God." They embraced. Her mother whispered, "You're alive." Maggie whispered back, "I learned things. Terrible, important things. We need to talk." She stepped inside to begin rebuilding. Both literal rubble and metaphorical ruins. The years that followed were hard, rebuilding Germany from ashes. But all 3 women kept their promises. Maggie spent 1946 and 47 going through denazification. British occupation officials interviewed her for months. Former Nazi Party members, former military personnel. Everyone had to be cleared. She told them the truth. "I taught Nazi ideology to children. I was wrong. I want to teach truth now." In 1947 she was cleared to teach. Assigned to an elementary school in a rebuilt section of Hamburg. She taught history, German language, ethics. The new curriculum emphasized democratic values, critical thinking, question everything. She never hid her past from students, used it as a teaching tool. "I learned that propaganda works," she told them. "I believed lies because they were repeated often enough. Question everything, even your teachers, especially your teachers." Maggie never married, partly by choice, partly by circumstance. She devoted her life to education. She maintained correspondence with Mrs. Pritchard in America. Twice a year, regular letters, until Mrs. Pritchard died in 1963. In 1952, a German graduate student interviewed Maggie for research on POW experiences. The student's thesis was later published as a book about reintegration. Maggie's testimony became central to it. One quote became famous: "They removed our chains and called us human. That single act did more to defeat Nazi ideology in my heart than 1,000 propaganda pamphlets could have done." Liesel returned to her family's farm in Bavaria, the American occupation zone. The farm had damage but was functional. Her family was intact. She used the baking techniques she'd learned from Sergeant Calloway to supplement the farm income. In 1948, she opened a small bakery in the village. In 1950, she married a local farmer named Hans. He'd lost his left leg in the war. Neither of them discussed the war much. They focused on building a future instead of dwelling on the past. They had 3 children, born in 51, 53, and 55. Liesel taught them English using what she'd learned in Alabama, told them carefully edited stories about her time far away. "Once I was in a place where people were kind to me when they didn't have to be," she said. "Remember that. Kindness matters more than you know." In the 1970s, Liesel's village established an exchange program with a town in Alabama, by coincidence near the old camp location. Liesel became the coordinator. It was the first time in 25 years she'd publicly discussed her POW experience. In 1975, at age 49, she made an emotional return visit to America. She visited the site of Camp Aliceville. It had been demolished decades ago. Residential houses stood there now. She placed flowers where Barracks 3 once stood. She met Sergeant Calloway's widow. Calloway had died in 1968. His widow said, "Wade talked about you girls often. He said you taught him something about humanity he never forgot." Liesel replied, her voice breaking, "He taught us the same thing." Anna rebuilt her life in Austria with her children. She worked as a translator for American occupation forces. Her English and German skills were valuable. Later she became a court translator in Vienna. She advocated quietly for fair treatment of former POWs in legal proceedings, made sure they received due process, made sure the innocent weren't punished for the guilty's crimes. In 1952 she remarried, an Austrian lawyer, also a widower. They built a quiet life together. She helped her children understand their father's death. He died believing something that wasn't true, but he loved us, and that love was real. Hold on to the love. Let go of the lies. In the 1960s, Anna wrote a memoir. She never sought commercial publication. "It's for my children and grandchildren," she said, "not for the world." She titled it, "From Chains to Understanding, A German Woman's American Captivity." In one passage she wrote, "We expected barbarism and received civilization. We expected revenge and received justice. We expected hatred and received the possibility of redemption. I returned to Germany carrying this lesson. I tried to pass it to my children and they to theirs. This is how we rebuild from ashes." One act of unexpected humanity at a time. In 1965, the 3 women had a reunion in Vienna. 20 years since their captivity ended. All 3 were now in their 40s and 50s. They spent a weekend together. The first time since 1946. They walked Vienna streets, shared memories, discussed the lives they'd built. Maggie asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if they'd treated us the way we expected?" Liesel answered, "We'd have stayed bitter and angry, forever enemies." Anna added, "Instead, we learned the world could be different than we'd been taught. We carried that knowledge home. That was our responsibility." They parted with promises to meet again. They never did. Life got in the way. But they wrote letters, kept in touch, remained sisters across borders and decades. Maggie taught until she retired in 1985, 38 years in education. She became a mentor to young teachers, gave talks about propaganda and critical thinking. Her last public appearance was in 2001. A Hamburg school invited her to speak. She was 80 years old. Students asked what the most important lesson from her life was. She thought for a long time before answering. That ordinary people can believe terrible things if those things are repeated often enough. and that other ordinary people can show you the truth through simple kindness. Both are always possible. Choose carefully which kind of ordinary person you become. She died peacefully in 2003, age 83. Her students raised money for a scholarship in her name. Liesl lived a quiet life, farming, baking, raising her family. Her grandchildren knew she'd been a POW, but not the details. It wasn't something she talked about much. In 2009, her granddaughter interviewed her for a university journalism project. The full story emerged on tape for the first time.
Why didn't you tell us all this before?
Her granddaughter asked. Liesl smiled. You needed to grow up without the weight of it. Now you're ready to carry it forward. The tapes were donated to Bavarian State Archives. She died in 2010, age 84, surrounded by family. Her funeral included Canadian butter tarts made from Sergeant Calloway's recipe, the one he'd given her 64 years earlier. Anna remained intellectually active into old age. She completed her memoir, but never sought a publisher. It's for my children and grandchildren, not the world, she always said. But she donated the manuscript to Austrian archives in 1995. A filmmaker interviewed her for a documentary about women POWs. Her testimony became the most moving part of the film. She died in 1998, age 85. Her children published her memoir privately, 200 copies, for family and for archives, so the story wouldn't be lost. 3 ordinary women caught in extraordinary evil, treated with unexpected humanity, transformed by that humanity. They spent the rest of their lives trying to pass it forward. Their stories were preserved in archives, in letters, in memoirs, in interviews. Small ripples in the vast ocean of history, but ripples nonetheless. Anna's final words in her memoir captured everything. We arrived in America as enemies, chained and terrified. When those chains were removed, when we were called not animals, something in us broke. Not our spirits, but our lies. The lesson was simple but profound. The strongest response to hatred is not matching hatred, but demonstrating the humanity that hatred denies. Germany fell because it forgot this. We survived because America remembered it. I spent the rest of my life trying to honor that lesson. That is all any of us can do. Remember, we are all human. Treat each other accordingly, and teach our children to do the same.
One act of unexpected kindness at a time.